JazakAllah Khair. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum everybody. Hopefully everybody's doing well. Inshallah we'll continue from where we left off last week, and inshallah this will be the second to last session. So last week we began talking about the story of Musa alayhi salam and Khidr, who the majority also considered to be a prophet. And we briefly started the story. So I want to pick back up from when Musa alayhi salam when Musa alayhi salam finally gets to meet Khidr, right? Because initially there was a long journey involved for Musa alayhi salam and his servant, who many consider to be Yusha bin Nun, also a prophet alayhi salam, were first searching, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed them where they would find Khidr. So when they finally find Khidr alayhi salam, Allah says, فَوَجَدَ عَبْدًا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا آتَيْنَاهُ رَحْمَةً مِنْ عِنْدِنَا وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِنْ لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا. So the two of them found a slave, a servant from amongst our servants, who we had given mercy from us, right? وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِنْ لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا, and we had taught him from, given him knowledge from ourselves, min ladunna. So what we understand about what we kind of can take from this ayah, just from the beginning, or some of the lessons that we can derive from this ayah are: number one, Khidr alayhi salam was given this knowledge, the position that he was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referred to as rahmah, right? Is referred to as rahmah. So number one, knowledge, understanding, especially as it pertains to our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is a mercy, right? Not only a mercy for ourselves, but a mercy when we apply that knowledge for those around us as well. And this is something that we'll learn in the story of Musa and Khidr, is that what appears to be transgression, what appears to be oppression, what appears to be wrongdoing on the part of Khidr alayhi salam is in fact actually mercy. And so knowledge is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the second portion is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Allamnahu min ladunna," that we had taught him, we had given him knowledge from ladunna, from ourselves, right? So this is a type of knowledge. There are two types of knowledge. There is that which one arrives at, both are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but there is one that one arrives at through their own effort and through their own struggle. And as a result of that, that cause or that means, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows them to arrive at that knowledge. So there are certain types of knowledge that the more effort we put in, the more time we put in terms of our mental effort, or our ability to kind of learn and practice, or some sort of physical effort on our part, whether it be the time spent, or whether it be just trying to use our intellect as best as possible, right? We arrive at that knowledge more and more, right? We can study it, we can arrive at it through study and through through mental effort. And then there's a type of knowledge that is only arrived at through spiritual effort, and that is bestowed solely by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there is no blueprint for it. There's no, or not said there's no blueprint for it, but there's no handbook for it. There's no there's no amount of study, there's no amount of intellectual effort that will allow you or cause you to arrive at that knowledge. It is simply a means, it is simply something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows upon somebody. And it typically, right, not always, but it typically has to do with or follows that person's level of spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what scholars refer to as ilm ladunni. Ilm ladunni. And this is what Khidr alayhi salam had. This is what Khidr alayhi salam was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. right? And it's equally as important. It's more important actually that we work on our souls, because there is a type of knowledge, there's a type of understanding of the world that is arrived at when one spiritually connects to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more. When one stays away from Allah, from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited, and begins to do and implement those things that Allah has asked, and what is beyond, what is extra as well. Right? So those things are obligations, and those things that are recommended actions as well. Right? This person makes that part of their practice. This person is somebody who remembers Allah very frequently, right? Who remembers the hereafter very frequently, who connects to the hereafter more than they connect to this world. And again, this connects back to the whole theme that we've been kind of revolving around, which is faith and materialism, right? Worldviews. This world, that material worldview versus the hereafter worldview. And that's also highlighted through the story of Musa and Khidr alayhi salam, right? But as we continue to connect with that world more, connect with that reality more, which is our true reality, right? And engage with that more, then we find ourselves experiencing these openings that are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and from no other means. Um, and so there's what we know in our tradition as there's basar and there's basira, right? There's sight and then there's insight. um, and that is that you look at something and see the reality of that situation um, um, through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's allowing you to, or opening the reality of that situation to you, right? There's what we call firasa as well, right? Firasa, which Rasul tells us in a hadith, اتقوا من فراسة المؤمن فإنه ينظر بنور الله. Be wary, or be conscious, be wary of the firasa of a believer, because he sees by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's light, by the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And this firasa is a similar thing where it's that you are granted insight into the reality of a situation, right? Especially as it pertains to something to come, right? You're given that foresight. So this is the nature of Khidr alayhi salam. قال له موسى هل أتبعك على أن تعلمني مما علمت رشدا. Musa alayhi salam says to him, may I follow you so that you can teach me from from the right guidance that you have been taught. And there are many wisdoms that are derived from this ayah. It's all of them as they pertain to the character, the adab, the mannerisms of Musa alayhi salam. Okay, and we touched on that a little bit last week, but I wanted to kind of elaborate on that a little bit today. So Musa alayhi salam, again, as we've established, is um, one of the greatest prophets and messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one who has the unique favor and the unique station and position with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he was the one who spoke to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly without any intermediary. Right? Kalimullah, Musa alayhi salam. But despite this status, right, which again is not shared by, which is literally, shared by a handful of human beings, like who can literally be counted on one hand, from the beginning of creation until the end. So you're at that upper highest echelon, okay? That doesn't stop him from humbling himself before knowledge. When he's told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that there's somebody out there in the world that has knowledge that he doesn't have, right? He doesn't summon that person, or he doesn't, impose himself on that person, or he doesn't assert his authority and his status over that person, but he comes to him humbly as a student, okay? And not only does he just come to him, or he makes it a priority, and he says that I will travel as long as it takes, for as far as it takes, for as long as it takes, until I meet him, okay? But there's a lot in this ayah itself that there is to be, dissected. So Musa alayhi salam, number one, he asks him permission. هل أتبعك? May I follow you? Right? So we learn, number one, that when we're coming to knowledge, we don't bear any sense of entitlement before it, right? We are at the mercy of the one we are seeking knowledge from. We are humble before the one we're seeking knowledge from. Number two, he what we learn from Hal Attabi'uka is that he intends to follow him, right? He intends to follow and take after what his teacher is doing. Okay, may I pattern my behavior according to yours. So again, there's an added level of humility there where he is saying, I will do as you do. Okay. Um, Another point that we can derive from this is before the knowledge, right? Before any conversation about knowledge, there's a conversation about ittiba. So before the knowledge, there's a conversation about following, right? So what we learn from this as well is that there's a priority, there's an order, right? You don't just arrive at your teacher's doorstep, or you don't just show up on the first day of class with your teacher and assume that now, like, boom, we're getting into the heavy stuff, right? It's there's you know anybody who's watched Karate Kid knows that there's that initial period of, in the old one and the new one, but there's that initial period of, okay, what am I doing here, right? I'm just listening to the teacher. I'm breaking my ego, but I don't feel like I'm learning anything. But in that, actually, there's incredible learning that's taking place, right? The most important aspects of learning is taking place in that moment. But it can seem from the student's perspective that, okay, what are we actually doing here, right? That wax on, wax off period, or jacket on, jacket off period, right? Where now you're just learning to follow your teacher's instruction, right? So that ittiba comes before the ilm. The following comes before the seeking of knowledge. And the following includes within it service, right? The scholars mentioned that there should be service that precedes the learning. So when we have people of knowledge and we hope to benefit from them, the first question shouldn't be, what can you do for me? It should be, what can I do for you? How can I make this responsibility, or how can I make this process easier for you? How can I be of service to you, right? And there's countless blessings that are mentioned for what a person experiences in their life by virtue of their service, especially to people of knowledge and people of Allah. So there is that, okay? على أن تعلمني, that you may teach me. مما علمت. So مما علمت carries with it the understanding that there is some, teach me some of what you've learned, right? Again, that humility there, that I don't assume or I don't expect that now I'm going to be able to get everything that you have. There is that humility. Whatever little I can take from you, please be generous with me and teach it to me. Mimma ulimta, just some of what you have been taught. And then mimma ulimta also implies that you have been taught this knowledge by Allah. There's an acknowledgement of this knowledge that you have is from Allah. And so me asking you for it is likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has conferred a blessing upon you by teaching you this knowledge, and I am seeking that blessing as well. So for you to teach it to me would also be that blessing coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Ultimately, we should always, and the teacher, any teacher worth their salt, is not self-centered or not focused on their own or what they have, but they recognize that what they have is from Allah, right? And so there's that recognition here also from Musa alayhi salam, and also recognizing that whatever knowledge does come is solely as a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just as his teacher has been blessed with it. Rushda, which is basically indicates right guidance. Okay, so there's two understandings of this. Number one is that this rushda goes back to the knowledge that Khidr had from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you this right guidance, right? And right guidance here means something that makes our situation individually and collectively better, right? Guiding towards something better, okay? So number one is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Khidr, this ilm rushda, right? This right guidance. And the second understanding is that Musa alayhi salam is asking for right guidance from Khidr. So the rushda would then go back to and tu'allimani. Okay, so it's a bit of a more detailed discussion, but the point is Musa alayhi salam is in one understanding saying, teach me the right guidance that Allah has taught you, and in another understanding saying, teach me what Allah has taught you so that you may guide me through it. So you might give me right guidance through it. They both kind of allude back to this a similar meaning, right? But there is an understanding and there is an admittance of number one, the need to be guided. The need to be guided. While Musa alayhi salam is a messenger who has, one of the greatest ummahs of all time, but still there is that humbling himself before guidance and that acknowledgement of needing to be guided, right? Um, um, there's the dua that we recite, that we are taught, right? That we learn in the Quran as well. Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana lihada wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. That all praise and thanks is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who guided us to this, and there was no chance, there was no way that we would have been guided had Allah not guided us, right? Um, and then also overall, we see that Musa alayhi salam is by anybody asking to be taught, they are admitting their ignorance, right? They are admitting their ignorance. And so there is no learning without first humility. There is no learning without humility. For any of us who've ever been in a class where we thought we already knew what was being taught, we can attest to the fact that we didn't learn anything in that class, right? Or for any of us who came to a class thinking that, we don't know what it is. We're not saying that we already know what's being taught, but we don't see any benefit in what's being taught. We also didn't learn anything. But it was only when we felt empty, when we felt a void that only knowledge could fill, and we were therefore hungry to fill that void and humble and recognizing and acknowledging that there was a void there, that we actually bridged that gap a little bit. So these are just some of the many, lessons that are derived from this short, small ayah that teaches us about how we should approach knowledge. And again, when it comes to especially the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his deen, there is no room for arrogance. There is no room for, I already know that. There is no room for, well, I don't really need this. This isn't of that much benefit to me. No, this is quite literally a matter of life and death. And not even beyond life and death, it's a matter of afterlife, life and death, or felicity and destruction in the hereafter eternally. Right. So especially as it pertains to that, we should adopt these mannerisms and these characteristics when it comes to coming towards knowledge. So then Khidr alayhi salam tells Musa alayhi salam, he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَالَ إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِيَ صَبْرًا. Khidr alayhi salam says to Musa alayhi salam, you will not be able to bear patiently with me. Okay. وَكَيْفَ تَصْبِرُ عَلَى مَا لَمْ تُحِطْ بِهِ خُبْرًا. And how could you be patient about things which you have no knowledge of, things that the understanding of, or things that you are not able to encompass, things about, the reality of which you're not able to encompass, right? And you have not been informed about them either. So, number one, we understand that there is a difficulty. There is a difficulty that's associated with the pursuit of knowledge. And even more so for Musa alayhi salam. Why? Or specifically in this context, for any of us, obviously, but for Musa alayhi salam, why? Because the things that he's going to see go against what he already knows from his knowledge. From Musa alayhi salam's knowledge, from what Allah has taught him, there are things that he will see that go against, from an apparent, from an ostensible perspective, go against what he knows to be right. And this can often get in the way of more knowledge. And that's not to say that we don't go with what we know, that we don't try and apply what we know, but it's to say that sometimes what we know gets in the way of us learning more. Okay. Um, and ultimately, right, what takes place between Musa alayhi salam and Khidr is what was supposed to take place, right? And there's lessons to be learned, derived from that as well, and we'll get into that. But think first about an example where you learn something from your teacher, okay, a general rule, a general principle, okay, and then you notice that your teacher you see an instance in which your teacher kind of goes against that general rule and principle. And so now, because of your knowledge of that general principle, you start to question your teacher, or you start to doubt your teacher, or you start to go against your teacher, right? Not understanding or realizing that perhaps there is nuance, that thing, that whatever, that rule, that general concept that you don't yet know. Or there is an application, there's a wisdom in application of that general principle, that because of your teacher's advanced knowledge or their experience is applying that thing in a certain way that you haven't yet understood, or your experience hasn't yet taken you to that place where you can kind of comprehend or appreciate that, right? um so okay, let's say, for example, okay, there was an instance in which there's a companion who was um praying um nawafil salah, right? They were praying extra salah, not the fard. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was calling out to that companion, okay? Was trying to get their attention, or trying to call them. And so this companion um continued their salah, right? Because they understand that salah is of utmost importance. It's a connection between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, etc., etc. Okay. And so this person doesn't respond to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, okay, question: what's the difference between nafil and sunnah? Um, so there isn't really that much of a difference, in terms of both of them are extra supererogatory prayers. Like, neither of them are obligations, right? But oftentimes sunnah is referred to, there are like a set number of 12 sunnahs in the day that follow, or they're called the sunnah muakkada. They follow the five main salah. So there's two before fajr, there's four before dhuhr, two after dhuhr, there's two after maghrib, and there's two after isha. So oftentimes people will refer to that as sunnah, and then any salah that's prayed beyond that as nafil. In general, there's not, again, both of them are extra prayers, but there are sunnah prayers that are much more established, and they have a specific time. And often people refer to those as sunnah, and what is beyond those as nafil. But you know, it's one of those terms that that there's just a bit of nuance there. So in this scenario, this person is praying, and then they come to the Prophet ﷺ after they finish praying. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Why didn't you respond to me?" And the person says, "Well, I was praying, Ya Rasulullah." And the Prophet ﷺ then teaches that person that for you to respond to the Prophet of Allah is a greater obligation on you than to pray extra supererogatory prayers, right? Us responding to the Prophet ﷺ is an obligation, while praying extra salahs is something extra, okay? And so there was a misunderstanding there, or misapplication of that general rule there in that situation, right? So that's just a simple example. But in any case, Khidr alayhi salam is telling Musa alayhi salam, this will be difficult for you. إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِيَ صَبْرًا. You will be unable to have patience in this pursuit of knowledge. وَكَيْفَ تَصْبِرُ عَلَى مَا لَمْ تُحِطْ بِهِ خُبْرًا. And especially when what you are going to experience or encounter will run contrary to what you know. Okay? There's a knowledge here that, again, that you're not able to arrive at without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so in the interim, it will be difficult for you, because you won't understand the reality of the situation. But Musa alayhi salam, being sincere, being adamant about his pursuit of knowledge, being trying to better himself or elevate himself, alayhi salam, he says, قال ستجدني إن شاء الله صابرا ولا أعصي لك أمرا. You will find me, God willing, inshallah, if Allah wills, you will find me to be patient and I will not disobey you in any way. Okay, and again, here is a reiteration of his humility before his teacher. And it's something, again, for us to learn from, right? We, especially over the past, in the postmodern era, and even more so, it seems as time progresses, we don't value, and we don't have, our society doesn't as much value expertise. And not only expertise, but especially in specific realms and arenas, right? There's still places where expertise is valued, right? In many of the material sciences. And then there's places where expertise is not valued. And unfortunately, the spiritual sciences and Islamic knowledge and religious knowledge just in general falls into that category very heavily. So as it pertains to, like, say, for example, medicine or law or science, anything, related to science, engineering, math, we recognize very clearly that not everybody's opinion is the same, right? My opinion on the COVID vaccine is not as, is not as important as, let's say, Dr. Fauci's opinion on it, right? And as it should be, and that's because we recognize expertise and authority. Whereas in the religious pursuits or the sacred sciences or less material studies, there is just this understanding, this false understanding that all of our opinions are equal. So I can interpret this just like you can interpret this, and it is what it is, right? My opinion is just as good as yours. So that leads to a lot of debate and a lot of back and forth with people who don't really have any ground to stand on. Okay. Musa alayhi salam, again here, one of the greatest messengers, human beings ever. He says to Khidr alayhi salam, I won't disobey you. I won't disobey you. Even though Musa alayhi salam has been sent on earth specifically for the children of Israel to obey. He's been sent specifically as a prophet, as a messenger, to be obeyed. He says, I won't disobey you. I'll take, as the Arabic saying goes, ala ra'si wal ayn, like, as you say, right? Whatever you say goes, okay? Again, it's very, very important, especially as it relates to our development with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we come before a teacher, when we come before knowledge, to humble ourselves before that knowledge and not put ourselves and our egos between us and our teacher. And that will happen inevitably. But there's a process of overcoming that and breaking that down. Again, there's, with anybody other than messengers, right, there is a caveat there. That caveat is, so long as what's being commanded doesn't go against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger. Why? Because لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. There is no obedience to creation, right, if it means disobeying the creator. So there is that caveat with anyone other than messengers. So still, if if your teacher, quote unquote, tells you to do something blatantly haram, right, you don't say, well, I'm following my teacher. No, that, common sense tells you in that point, you don't listen. But again, that person at the end of the day, if they do tell you that, is not really a teacher to begin with. Okay. وَلَا أَعْصِي لَكَ أَمْرًا, I won't disobey you. Right? We really need to kind of internalize that, and think when we have an objection within ourselves, is this objection that I'm feeling, does it stem from knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said otherwise, and thus my objection is from trying to uphold what Allah has said and what the Rasul have said? Or is this objection just from my own ego, my own nafs, my own soul, and it's because it doesn't sit well with me that I'm objecting? Okay. And so now Khidr alayhi salam says, he gives a condition, okay? قال فإن اتبعتني فلا تسألني عن شيء حتى أحدث لك منه ذكرا. If you're adamant, if you're serious about following me, the condition is, you cannot ask me about anything don't ask me about anything that I'm doing until I tell you about it. Okay, until I mention it to you myself. Okay. And again, there's many lessons that can be derived from this. One of them is that often we ask questions prematurely, or we interrupt the flow of learning before it's reached its conclusion. Okay. How many of you have ever been in a class? I know I personally have, where you ask a question that will then or you have a question, maybe you don't ask it, right? Whether you ask it or not, there's a question that you have that is then answered later in the course of that same discussion. Okay. Right, exactly. Right. Or what ends up happening is there's a question that you have that you don't have the prerequisite knowledge to know the answer to, or to appreciate the answer to. Okay. So you still have that question burning within you, but even if you were to be given the answer, you wouldn't be able to understand it correctly because you don't have the prerequisite knowledge. It's like somebody who's learning arithmetic asking about differential math. If they get the answer, they're not going to understand the answer. Okay, because they still have a lot to get through first. So this is a condition. And Musa alayhi salam obviously accepts this condition. Okay. So they set out. فانطلقا. They began to travel together. حتى إذا ركب في السفينة خرقها. So they come across in their journey, they need to cross the sea, okay, cross this body of water. And there are a group of impoverished, sailors whose livelihood is attached to this boat, right? They go out at sea, they fish, things like that, okay? And so Musa alayhi salam and Khidr, and one thing that we learn actually that we'll get to a little bit later, is that they are actually both not very well off. Musa alayhi salam and Khidr, despite being incredible people, right, chosen servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're actually not really financially doing super well. Okay. And this is another lesson that the path towards serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the path towards spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may often mean making, or always will mean making sacrifices in this dunya. It doesn't mean that you'll necessarily be poor. It doesn't mean that somebody who's rich is unable to do this. But it does mean that regardless of what your material circumstance is, there are sacrifices as they pertain to this worldly life. Right? The Prophet tells us in a hadith, whoever desires or hereafter will have to let go of some things in this worldly life. And whoever really desires and wants this dunya will have to forego and forfeit some things in the hereafter. Right? The two don't necessarily, again, it's not like they're polar opposites in that, like, you can't have the dunya and the akhirah, but you can't be both preoccupied and make your priority the dunya and make your priority the akhirah. It doesn't work. Okay? And there is the ayah in the Quran that we learn that balances these two, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us the du'a minhum man yaqulu rabbana atina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasana. There are amongst them people who say, our Lord, give us goodness in this life and give us goodness in the hereafter. And obviously the goodness of the hereafter is even greater. Okay. So anyways, they ask for a ride, and these poor sailors, or these poor fishermen, they give them a ride free of charge, right? They let them come with them. And so when they're on this boat, Khidr alayhi salam punctures a hole in the boat. And Musa alayhi salam objects. And he says, قال أخرقتها لتغرق أهلها لقد جئت شيئا إمرا. That, have you, like, what are you doing? Did you, are you trying to drown these people? Right? You have done something egregious. You have done something unbecoming, untoward, right? You have done something wrong. This is not right. Especially given the fact that they gave us a ride. So Musa alayhi salam objects out of forgetfulness. He forgot the nature of what was agreed upon, and he forgot this is it in practice, right? It's happening right now. But again, Khidr makes this hole in this boat, and Musa alayhi salam doesn't know what's going on. Okay, so he objects. But there's an important theme here that is going to be reiterated, and it's one that's of incredible importance for us to understand. And this is a hadith the Prophet ﷺ says, where he says, "Nahnu nahkumu bil-zawahir, wallahu yatawalla as-sarair." He says, we judge and give verdicts and give rulings by that which is apparent, and what is hidden is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is in the realm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take care of. What does that mean? That means in any given situation, our responsibility is to move forward and act according to what is apparent. And what is the reality of somebody's, because we don't know the reality of somebody's internal situation. Okay, so we act upon what is apparent, and the reality of somebody's internal situation is between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of that. So, for example, right, during the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there were people who within his community claimed, professed faith, but were not actually believers. In fact, they in reality rejected the message and were opposed to it and were actively hoping and plotting for its downfall. They were actively working against the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims while outwardly claiming to be Muslim. Now, did the Prophet ﷺ ever fight them? No. Was even the Prophet ﷺ made aware of the reality of their situation? Yes, he was. But did he fight them? Did he oppose them? No, he didn't. Why? Because we rule and judge based on that which is apparent, and the rest is in the hands of Allah. What is hidden, what is the reality of somebody's situation is between them and Allah. So Musa alayhi salam here is going based off of what is apparent. But there may be a reality that exists beyond what is apparent that we don't understand. And it's not our job to understand, and it's not our job to try and act based off of what we think the reality might be, but it's our job to go with what we have been told. Okay, so this is what Musa alayhi salam is doing in his objection. But again, he did so out of forgetfulness. So Khidr alayhi salam reminds him, قال ألم أقل إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا. Did I not tell you, did I not say, right, that you won't ever be able to be patient with me? So Musa alayhi salam says, قال لا تؤاخذني بما نسيت ولا ترهقني من أمري عسرا. Don't hold this against me. Right? I genuinely forgot, so don't count this against me. Okay? And don't cause me difficulty in this pursuit of mine, right? Don't make it hard on me, right? Basically be lenient, have mercy with me, overlook this shortcoming of mine. Okay? And so Khidr alayhi salam obliges. And they continue on their journey. فانطلق حتى إذا لقي غلاما فقتله. قال أقتلت نفسا زكية بغير نفس لقد جئت شيئا نكرا. So then they continued, and now when they arrive at shore, Musa alayhi salam, Khidr alayhi salam, they come across a group of young men, okay, who are playing, as some of the books mention. And Khidr alayhi salam takes one of them and he kills him, a young man. Okay. And so Musa alayhi salam says, and he objects. قال أقتلت نفسا زكية بغير. What are you doing? Are you killing an innocent soul? Right? An innocent soul, a pure innocent soul, without بغير نفس means that, unjustly. He hasn't killed anybody else. So there's no retribution here involved. You're not killing him because of some crime he committed, because he killed somebody else. So what are you doing? لقد جئت شيئا نكرا. Right? What an evil thing to do. What a horrendous thing that you've done. Now, again, this is a young boy, right? Who, as we believe, right, young children who have not yet reached the age of maturity, they are not held accountable for, it's not like a blanket statement, but in terms of their culpability, their responsibility, in terms of doing right and act staying away from that which is wrong, following the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their accountability is not yet there. And so Musa alayhi salam says he's a pure soul. what are you doing? لقد جئت شيئا نكرا. And now Khidr alayhi salam again says, قال ألم أقل لك إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا. Did I not tell you that you won't ever be able to be patient with this? Okay. Now you're starting to see something where to be patient in these situations without knowledge is actually almost impossible to do. No like person who no person who has a no person who has an inclination towards upholding justice and upholding that which is right would be able to sit idly by while something like this takes place. Okay. And the lesson is not that we are asked to do that either. That's not the lesson. The lesson is that, when we see innocent people being killed, we're like, well, we have to be patient and not do anything if we can do something, right? That's not the meaning of patience. That we do have to be patient when these things happen, right? Because that's what's required of us. But it doesn't mean that we don't take action if we're able to. Okay, and so that's something that I want to clarify, but we'll continue. And then Musa, okay, what we discussed. قال إن سألتك عن شيء بعدها فلا تصاحبني قد بلغت من لدني عذرا. So Musa alayhi salam himself says, if I ask you for something, if I ask you for anything else after this, okay, if I again object, or if I question you again, فلا تصاحبني, then don't continue on with me. قد بلغت من لدني عذرا. Right? You have given me more than one chance, more than one opportunity. You've accepted these excuses from me. Okay. And so that's it. There's not going to be any more excuses, any more, objections. And if I do, no more excuses. Okay. And this is a very interesting part because there's a narration in which the Prophet ﷺ said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on Musa. Had he not said this, right? Imagine how many more amazing things that we would have learned. Imagine how many more amazing things we would have learned had Musa alayhi salam not put this condition on himself. So the story continues. فانطلقا حتى إذا أتيا أهل قرية استطعما أهلها فأبوا أن يضيفوهما فوجدا فيها جدارا يريد أن ينقض فأقامه قال لو شئت لاتخذت عليه أجرا. So they continue on their journey. Their journey kind of extends, and now they are again, we mentioned that they don't have much money, right? They don't have many provisions. Often the journey, the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, working for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, means that there's some difficulty encountered on the way, right? Because again, those who are in those positions, they often sacrifice, they forego these worldly luxuries. So now they're in a position where they need some hospitality. So they come upon a group, they come upon a small town. And especially in those times, but even now, right? Even now, but especially even more so in those times, you have to imagine, right? Imagine a time where there are no hotels, okay? There are no restaurants. There are no rental cars. There are no airports, okay? And so the way that you accommodate yourself in a foreign place is that you're relying on the hospitality of the people there. And it's well understood, right? Many, if not all cultures, pride themselves on their hospitality, pride themselves on taking care of their guests, pride themselves on honoring their guests, right? So it's well established, it's well understood as a practice, right? You host a guest, especially for at least a minimum amount of time. And so, and you see that in the even the example of the group of poor people who own the boat, okay? But these people, their situation, they were so stubborn and they were so kind of stingy that they refused even to give the smallest accommodations, right? We're talking like not like crazy luxury accommodations here. We're talking about just some some sustenance, some food, some some bread, maybe some water, just something to help them continue along, right? And even in in the Islamic tradition, when it comes to categories of giving charities, zakat, one of the categories of people that can accept, that are able to get charities, zakat money, are people who are stranded, people who are encountering difficulty on their travels, right, in a foreign place, وابن السبيل. So they refuse, okay, to extend them this the smallest of courtesies. But now Khidr alayhi salam notices that there is a wall. Okay, there's a wall in this town that is about to fall into a state of disrepair. Okay, it's on the brink of collapsing, and he begins to repair it. He begins to do them a service, right? Work on this wall, fix this wall for them. And so now Musa alayhi salam, he doesn't necessarily object, right? Because Khidr alayhi salam is not doing them a service. But what he says is, you could have at least asked them for compensation. If they didn't want to host us, if they didn't want to accommodate us in any way, well, we could have at least proposed that we do this for some compensation, right? To kind of assist us in our needs. And so now condition strike 3 has been made. Okay. And again, because of the condition that Musa alayhi salam set on himself, now Khidr alayhi salam says, well, this is it, right? This is strike 3. We've reached the condition that you set. قال هذا فراق بيني وبينك. This is the end of the road for us. This is where we part ways. سأنبئك بتأويل ما لم تستطع عليه صبرا. I will tell you of the ta'wil, the interpretation, the understanding of what you are unable to be patient with. سأنبئك بتأويل ما لم تستطع عليه صبرا. Okay. Ta'wil is an interpretation, an understanding, the explanation of something, okay, that otherwise would have been understood incorrectly, right? This is what an interpretation and explanation is, right? Something that otherwise would have been understood incorrectly. So he now begins to tell him about everything, the reality of everything that took place, right? There was what was apparent, and then there was what was the reality of those situations. So now he says, أما السفينة فكانت لمساكين يعملون في البحر فأردت أن أعيبها وكان وراءهم ملك يأخذ كل سفينة غصبا. As for the boat, as for the ship, it belonged to a group of impoverished people whose livelihoods were connected to the sea. Okay? And so now you're thinking, well, even more reason for you to not have damaged their property. فأردت أن أعيبها. My intention, what I was doing, what I was hoping to do was causing a flaw in it. Not destroying it, أعيبها, right? Making a flaw, making an aib in it. Causing some damage, some sort of flaw within it, but not destroying it completely. وكان وراءهم ملك يأخذ كل سفينة غصبا. And there was at where the ruler of their people, right? There was waiting for them once they docked a tyrannical ruler who was seizing every ship by force. And the implication here is every serviceable boat, right? Every boat that was basically able to be used. And he was seizing it unjustly. Now their livelihood is connected to this boat, right? They would be with nothing if their boat was taken from them, okay? But because when this boat was being inspected, they found that there was a defect in it, a flaw in it, right? This boat needs repair. They didn't take it. And the repair was such that they would be able to make it. Again, he didn't destroy their boat entirely, but he made a flaw within it that they would be able to repair, and that would preserve their livelihood. Now, I want you to imagine this from the perspective of the owners of the boat. Initially, how do you think they would have reacted when they noticed that there was this defect, or there was this hole that was punctured in their boat, right? And then by deduction, they realized, well, these are from the guests, right? These people that we gave a ride to. Of course, they would be mad. They'd be infuriated, right? How is it that we go out of our way to show them courtesy, to show them, to try and do something nice for them, and they spit in our face, right? They ruin our boat. Now imagine how they feel when they are faced with this tyrannical king who then is trying to seize their boat and only doesn't do so because he finds a flaw in it. Right? There is an understanding there. Now perhaps they're thanking and they're happy and they feel indebted to the one who caused this flaw or who punctured this hole, right? Who punctured their boat like this. وَأَمَّا الْغُلَامِ, and as for the young boy, فَكَانَ أَبَوَاهُ مُؤْمِنَيْنِ فَخَشِينَا أَنْ يُرْهِقَهُمَا طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا فَأَرَدْنَا أَنْ يُبْدِلَهُمَا رَبُّهُمَا خَيْرًا مِنْهُ زَكَاةً وَأَقْرَبَ رَحْمًا. And as for this child, as for the young boy, his parents were people of faith, believers. فَخَشِينَا أَنْ يُرْهِقَهُمَا طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. So, knowing and fearing that when this child would grow up, right, he would be rebellious, he would be tyrannical, he would be oppressive towards them, right? He would overcome them or overbear them with this tyranny, with this rebelliousness and disbelief, right? And ingratitude. So this child would eventually grow up and be a nightmare for his parents. Not only a nightmare, but a source of evil. A source of evil. A source that would put their faith in jeopardy. And not only their faith, but his own faith would be out of the question. Right? طغيانا وكفرا. Now imagine, right, the amount of suffering that a person can be caused based on their children. There is no suffering. There is little suffering that can be experienced by a person, that's like the suffering that is caused to them directly by their children. So Allah says, and Khidr says to Musa alayhi salam, فَأَرَدْنَا أَن يُبْدِلَهُمَا رَبُّهُمَا خَيْرًا مِنْهُ زَكَاةً وَأَقْرَبَ رَحْمًا. So our intention, our hope was that our Lord would replace their child, would give them another child who was purer in faith, who was a more righteous person and more compassionate and merciful to their righteous parents. Okay. Now again, Musa alayhi salam is acting upon that which is apparent, and that is what all of us, every single one of us, is asked to do. But the reality of this situation was that what was intended, okay, despite the pain and the agony and the suffering that these parents felt by losing their child, right? By losing their child, by having to grieve their child, what was intended for them was a blessing that was even greater. And what was intended for them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was actually the deterring or averting an even greater harm, an even greater difficulty, right? Now again, is this a situation that any of us wants to be put in? Of course not, absolutely not. And we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from this. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from these trials and tribulations. But the lesson is that when we find ourselves in a trial and a tribulation, or when we see trials and tribulations around us that we can't make sense of, we understand and hold firm to the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not remove a blessing from somebody except with the intention to give them a greater one. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not intend or give any hardship to somebody except it is a means by which to facilitate greater ease. Okay? There are many of us who don't arrive at guidance until we are tested. And that is not a fault of anyone but ourselves. And again, these parents here are not these types of people. They're people who are rather righteous, pious servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by virtue of their piety and their righteousness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed them wanted to prevent them from the harm of this difficulty and bless them with something even better. Now, when we're thinking in terms of this life and the hereafter, okay, this life, and this is just another reflection. If we are measuring our value based on this this world, and success and downfall based on what is limited to this world, okay? And this doesn't seem really like much of a win. Or maybe it does, but it seems like it's still, quite a big difficulty. But if we are considering and measuring our value, success and downfall in terms of the hereafter, then what we mentioned before is that a young child is not held accountable in the hereafter when they are not past the age of responsibility. So now, by means of the righteousness and the virtue of these parents, their child is saved. And not only is their child saved, but they are blessed with another child. And you think about the people of the boat. One might think, well, they were being charitable. And so then they're caused to suffer based on them being charitable. But no, quite the contrary, because when we are charitable, we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never takes a blessing away from us based on our good conduct, based on our based on our charity. Allah only gives us greater. And so now imagine the thing, the wealth by which they were charitable, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects for them. The wealth by which they were charitable, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects that wealth for them. Right? You imagine and you consider that there are circumstances in which our charity protects us from hardship. This is what we know to be true from the Prophet ﷺ. And actually, when there are fitan, when there are difficulties that we see around us in the world, one of the best things for us to do is to try and give charity, because charity is a shield, is a barricade, is an insulation from trials and tribulations, and also is a means for bringing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure closer and averting his wrath. Right? It is a proof of sincerity. In a hadith, the Prophet says, that charity is something that extinguishes the wrath and the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So again, the people of the boat are protected by means of their charity. These parents are protected by means of their righteousness, okay, from evil, from a greater harm, and they are replaced with a better benefit. And now وأما الجدار فكان لغلامين يتيمين في المدينة وكان تحته كنز لهما وكان أبوهما صالحا فأراد ربك أن يبلغا أشدهما ويستخرجا كنزهما رحمة من ربك وما فعلته عن أمري ذلك تأويل ما لم تستطع عليه صبرا. And as for the wall, the wall belonged to two young orphans in the city, in the town that we were at. وَكَانَ تَحْتَهُ كَنْزٌ لَهُمَا. And beneath it was a hidden, a buried treasure that was for them. Okay? And their father was a righteous man. فَأَرَادَ رَبُّكَ أَن يَبْلُغَا أَشُدَّهُمَا. So your Lord intended that they reached their maturity, and that their treasure, that their wealth then be brought out for them as a mercy from your Lord. وَمَا فَعَلْتُهُ عَنْ أَمْرِي. And this is of incredible importance. None of this I have done with my, by my own, by my own command. These were not of, something of my own decision. These were not things I did on my own accord. These are all things that I was commanded to do by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا فَعَلْتُهُ عَنْ أَمْرِي. Right? And again, this is where we draw kind of the distinction, that designation, where we don't say and sit here and say, well, I'm going to try and be like Khidr alayhi salam and go out and no. This is knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given to him. This was commands that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given to him to enact. None of us can say that we have that. Okay, none of us can claim that that relation, that revelation, or that whatever, that prophethood, or any of it. Okay, so it's important that Khidr alayhi salam is reminding Musa alayhi salam, again, this is not based on me. I'm just a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ذَلِكَ تَأْوِيلُ مَا لَمْ تَسْطِعْ عَلَيْهِ صَبْرًا. That is the interpretation, the understanding, the explanation of what you didn't even have the slightest patience with, that you couldn't even muster up the slightest amount of patience to endure. Okay. So these two young men, right? The wall, basically hid underneath the wall was this treasure for them. And because their father was righteous, وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا. And this is why many of the scholars, they say that to be righteous ensures not only your own um, well-being and prosperity, but it is a protection even for your family and for your children. And that's why some have said the best inheritance, the best thing that you can prepare for your children is to be righteous yourself, right? Because we see that your children, the children of the righteous, will not be made to suffer because of the virtue of their parents. The children of the righteous will not be made to suffer because of the virtue that you think that somebody who sacrificed this world for the sake of the hereafter, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause this world to be a means of hardship for their children? That this person gave up this world for the hereafter, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, do you think that then this world that they gave up for Allah then will be a means of difficulty and punishment for their children? Right? Absolutely not. So, right, this is number one lesson that we can take from this, right? If we want to plan and we want to put something forth for ourselves, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَتَزَوَّدُوا فَإِنَّ خَيْرَ الزَّادِ التَّقْوَى. Prepare, take your, take your provisions, take that which will support you. But the best provision, the best sustenance, the best preparation you can make, the best thing that you can take is taqwa. Is taqwa, is consciousness of Allah, awareness of Allah, a relationship with Allah. Okay. And the plan was that once they reach the age of maturity, once they're able to protect themselves, stand up for themselves, support themselves, then this wealth would be made available to them when they needed it most. When they needed it most. Now you can imagine, well, this group of people in this town, they wouldn't even extend the slightest courtesy to Musa alayhi salam and Khidr. So if this wealth was to be made plain to them, the wall was to come down, they were to see the treasure underneath it. Right? These people who wouldn't even extend the smallest courtesy to these guests, do you think that they would give these children their wealth rightfully? Right? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So again, this potential, this what appeared to be like a, we were refused hospitality. These people were rude and mean to us, and now you're doing them a courtesy without even, getting paid for it. Like it seems like you're being taken advantage of on top of being taken advantage of, right? It's actually not what it appears. Okay, and all of this again is the command of Allah. So now again, we see the fruit of righteousness, as it pertains to, our charity, as it pertains to our patience in the face of difficulty, right? As it pertains to our service, as it pertains to our bearing with the difficulty and the hardship of people, okay? And we understand that sabr, patience, is of three types. As-sabru ala ta'a, patience as it pertains to doing what Allah has commanded you to do. Was-sabru inda al-ma'siyah, and patience as it relates to staying away from what Allah has prohibited you from. And the third is being patient ala al-musibah, being patient as it pertains to dealing with hardship and difficulty and affliction. Okay, and we see all of these here as well. Now again, as Muslims, right, when we take this back to this concept of materialism, worldviews, right, this world versus the hereafter, if we are unaware and out of touch with our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and understanding his wisdom, not that we will ever understand with his wisdom, but understanding that he is all wise and that nothing in this world takes place outside of his permission, and that we don't recognize and understand the true nature of good and evil until that is made apparent to us, okay? Then it's very easy for us to see the things that go on in the world around us and question if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is allowing difficulty to happen, and for why and for what reason. And it's not to say that we should be the type of people that aren't moved by difficulty, or that aren't moved by when we see evil and injustice, but it's to recognize and always understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always in control, right? وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ اللَّهَ غَافِلًا عَمَّا يَعْمَلُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Allah reminds us in Surah Ibrahim. Do not ever consider that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is heedless or unaware of what the oppressors are doing, right? فَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ اللَّهَ مُخْلِفَ وَعْدِهِ رُسُلَهُ. Allah promises the believer success in the Quran, and He says, do not ever consider that Allah has gone against the promise that He made to His messengers, that the promise He has made to the believers through them. In other places, right? وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. It might be that you despise something, you hate something that is in fact good for you, and that you love something or want something that is in fact bad for you, right? So again, these are encounters and instances in which that veil of the wisdom behind something is lifted for us to recognize and see and take lesson from. Okay, and Musa alayhi salam, one of the greatest messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, also had difficulty with this. So it's not something that we just expect to be able to do, but it's to recognize that there is something that is much beyond, right? And even as it pertains to for example, an example that's very close to all of our minds is this pandemic, right? In a hadith, the Prophet tells us that plague is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends, and it's a punishment for those who disobey or those who oppose Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's a mercy for the believers. It's a mercy for the believers. And that whoever bears patiently with it in a land that it has come to, right? And stay steadfast in that place, then that person will have the reward of a martyr. That person will have a very elevated station in the hereafter, right? Again, something that can be both difficulty and ease, something that can be both hardship and ease, depending on how one interacts with it and deals with it. And likewise is the same for these things, right? And there has been plenty of us who perhaps have been in our own lives, have seen situations in which we very badly wanted something and then found that thing, had we got it, would have been terrible for us. Or very badly didn't want something to happen and then realized that when it did happen, we were better for it, right? And again, these are lessons that we are asked to remind ourselves of at least weekly. So far we've gone through the test of faith, right? Of character, the test of faith, the test of wealth, now the test of knowledge, okay? And all of them we kind of discussed how they pertain to this relationship between this worldly view and the hereafter view. So inshallah, next week we'll conclude. Hopefully, inshallah, we'll go through the story of the Qarnayn, and then we'll go through the last few ayat of the surah, inshallah. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to benefit from the best of that which was said and heard. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for anything, any shortcomings, anything we said that was a mistake was from ourselves, anything we said that was correct was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all tawfiq to implement and to better ourselves through knowledge. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Everybody, I hope inshallah to see you guys next week.